He was 22, drove a matte black Porsche, bought with his father's money, and genuinely believed the strip of black cotton tied around his waist made him a predator. He cornered me near the catering tent, cracking his knuckles, grinning for the crowd of trust fund friends he'd assembled. He wanted to break the quiet, graying driver to prove a point. He didn't know I'd spent 12 years in the teams. He didn't know violence wasn't a sport to me. It was a native language. The leather seat of Richard Cole's armored Mercedes Maybach always smelled like expensive cologne and sterile recycled air. I sat behind the wheel, the engine idling in a silent hum, watching the rain streak the tinted glass. I was officially on the payroll as executive protection and logistics. In reality, I was a glorified chauffeur for a billionaire who made his fortune buying up distressed industrial properties and selling them for parts. Richard Cole was a man who viewed the world through the lens of leverage. Everyone was a tool, an obstacle, or an audience. I was a tool. Specifically, I was the heavy, silent object that made him feel secure when he traveled through the city he owned. "Jack," the voice came through the intercom from the back seat, crisp, demanding. "Yes, Mr. Cole." "We're going to be late for the merger dinner. Find a way around this." "Traffic is deadlocked on the FDR, sir. Accident up ahead. I'll cut through the surface streets." I eased the massive vehicle out of the standstill, slipping it through a closing gap between a delivery truck and a cab with an inch to spare. I did it smoothly, without spiking the RPMs. Smooth meant invisible. Invisible was exactly what I wanted to be. 5 years ago, I wasn't invisible. I was leading a 6-man element through the pitch-black, dusty corridors of a compound in Helmand Province. I wore night vision that turned the world into a grainy green nightmare, and I carried a suppressed Mk-18 rifle. I spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL. I had the blown-out knee and the ringing in my left ear to prove it. But mostly, I had the quiet. The deep, heavy quiet that settles into your bones when you've spent your entire adult life operating on the razor's edge of human survival, only to be dumped back into the civilian world where people have screaming matches over lukewarm lattes. I took the job with Cole because it paid 3 times what standard security firms offered. I needed the money. My daughter, Sarah, lived with her mother in Connecticut. Sarah had been born with a congenital heart defect. The surgeries were mostly done, but the specialized physical therapy and out-of-pocket medications required a mountain of cash. Cole's money kept my little girl breathing easily. For that, I'd wear the cheap black suit. I'd endure the condescension. I'd be invisible. We pulled up to the Cole estate in Greenwich just past 10 that night. The house was a sprawling monstrosity of glass and imported Italian stone. As I opened the rear door for Richard, the front doors of the house swung wide. Out walked Tyler. Tyler Cole was 22. He had his father's sharp jawline, but none of the older man's cold, calculating intelligence. Tyler was pure, unadulterated entitlement. He was built thick, a product of personal trainers, strictly monitored macros, and the kind of aggressive confidence that only comes from never having been punched in the mouth for stepping out of line. He was sweating, wearing a customized rash guard and fight shorts. "Dad," Tyler said, barely acknowledging me. He was bouncing lightly on his toes, throwing shadow punches into the damp night air. "You missed it. Tapped out my striking coach 3 times today. Guy couldn't handle the ground game." Richard patted his son's shoulder, a rare display of affection. "Good work, Ty. Keep it up. It builds discipline." Tyler stopped shadowboxing and looked at me. His eyes roamed up and down my frame. I'm not a small man, 6'2", 210 pounds, but I don't look like a bodybuilder. Real functional muscle, the kind built by carrying an 80-pound rucksack up a mountain, doesn't pop in a tailored suit. It just sits there, dense and quiet. "Hey, driver," Tyler said. He always called me that. Driver, never Jack. Tyler, I replied, my voice flat. You look stiff. You should get on the mats with me sometime. Loosen up those old joints. He smirked. It was a joke, but the edge to it was unmistakable. He was constantly looking for a measure of his own toughness, and I was the nearest object he perceived as inferior. I'm fine, thanks, I said, shutting the car door. Suit yourself. Wouldn't want you pulling a hamstring carrying the groceries. He chuckled, turning back to follow his father inside. I stood in the driveway for a long moment, the rain finally stopping, leaving the air thick and humid. I pressed my thumb against the steering wheel, feeling the familiar, calloused ridge on my knuckle. Just breathe, I told myself. Sarah's medical bills, the mortgage, the quiet life. Breathe. I got back in the car to park it in the garage. The switch in the back of my head, the one that turned the world from a peaceful civilian street into a grid of threats and angles, twitched. I forced it back down. I locked it away. Over the next 3 months, Tyler's obsession with martial arts went from a hobby to an identity. He had passed his black belt test at a high-end, heavily marketed MMA gym downtown, the kind of place where Wall Street traders went to choke each other out on their lunch breaks before going back to their desks. Tyler thought it made him lethal. His behavior around the estate shifted. He began treating the household staff not just with disdain, but as physical props. He would block the hallway when the maids tried to pass, holding his ground just to make them step around him. He'd grip the landscaper's hand too hard during a casual greeting, turning a handshake into a test of strength. And then he focused on me. It started small, microaggressions masked as accidental contact. I'd be walking through the kitchen to get the keys for the day, and Tyler would intentionally bump his shoulder hard into mine as he walked past. The first time it happened, my body reacted before my brain did. My center of gravity dropped instantly. My right foot slid back a fraction of an inch to establish a base. My hands didn't come up, but the muscles in my forearms went rock hard. Tyler stumbled slightly from the impact, surprised that I hadn't moved an inch. He looked back, irritated. Watch it, old man. Excuse me, I said evenly, releasing the tension in my legs. He scoffed and kept walking. He didn't realize how close he had come to being swept off his feet and having his shoulder dislocated. In the teams, close quarters combat wasn't about scoring points or making someone submit. It was about neutralizing a mortal threat in under 3 seconds so you could move on to the next one. You break the joint. You crush the airway. You drop the threat. It's brutal, ugly, and definitively unsporting. I took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline wash out of my system. It left a metallic taste in my mouth. A week later, I was waiting by the car, checking my phone. My ex-wife had texted an update on Sarah. The physical therapist was seeing great progress. She could walk almost a mile now without getting winded. I smiled at the screen. Who you texting? Your AARP rep? Tyler swaggered out of the garage. He had 2 of his friends with him this time, identical clones in designer streetwear, carrying gym bags. I put the phone in my pocket. Just family, Tyler. Mr. Cole needs to leave in 10 minutes. Yeah, hey guys, this is the driver I was telling you about. Tyler pointed a thumb at me. Looks like a tough guy, right? Stands all rigid. One of the friends snickered. Looks like he needs a chiropractor. Tyler stepped into my personal space. The distance between us was less than a foot. It's a classic intimidation tactic. Invade the bubble, force the other person to step back and concede dominance. I didn't step back. I just looked at him. His eyes were slightly bloodshot. He smelled like pre-workout powder and expensive cologne. You ever been in a real fight, Jack? Tyler asked, dropping the driver moniker just to make it personal. Or do you just stand around looking mean to scare off the paparazzi? I don't like fighting, Tyler, I said. It was the truest thing I had ever spoken to him. I despised it. I'd seen too much of what bodies look like when they're broken. Tyler laughed, looking back at his friends. See? I told you. Pure rent-a-cop. Guys like him, they put on the suit and think it makes them dangerous. I could fold you in half in 10 seconds, Jack. I'm sure you could, I said, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. Excuse me, I need to wipe down the windshield before your father comes out. I turned my back on him. It was a calculated risk, but a necessary one to de-escalate. As I walked to the front of the car, I heard him scoff. Coward, he muttered loudly. The word hit my spine like an ice pick. Images flashed behind my eyes, the dust of Fallujah, Miller bleeding out in my arms while we waited for medevac, the sound of the rotor blades, the smell of copper and dirt. I closed my eyes, squeezed the rag in my hand until my knuckles turned white, and began to wipe the pristine glass. Sarah, I thought. Think about Sarah. August arrived, bringing a suffocating heat wave to the East Coast. Richard Cole threw his annual summer corporate retreat at his secondary estate in the Hamptons. It was a massive affair. Executives, politicians, and a heavy rotation of young, beautiful people who seemed to exist solely to populate such parties. My job was to run the perimeter, coordinate the valets, and make sure none of the VIPs drank themselves into a liability. Tyler was in his element. He had commandeered a large section of the manicured back lawn near the pool. He and his friends had hauled out heavy foam training mats. They were shirtless, sweating in the afternoon sun, grappling and sparring, while a crowd of executives and their wives watched with amused, cocktail-fueled interest. I was standing by the catering tent in the shade, sipping a bottle of water, keeping an eye on the access gates. Jack? The voice cut through the ambient chatter and the thumping bass of the outdoor sound system. I turned. Richard Cole was waving me over. He was standing at the edge of the mats holding a martini. Tyler was in the center of the mats, breathing heavily, having just tapped out one of his friends. Tyler looked pumped up, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with adrenaline and the attention of the crowd. I walked over, my face an unreadable mask. Yes, Mr. Cole? Richard gestured loosely with his glass toward his son. Tyler here says he's running out of sparring partners. He says these boys are too soft. Richard chuckled. He was showing off his son like a prized racehorse. I told him we've got a big, strapping security guy right here. Give the boy a workout, Jack. Go a few rounds. I looked at Richard, then at Tyler. Tyler was grinning, slapping his padded MMA gloves together. Come on, Jack, Tyler called out, loud enough for the 50-odd people gathered around to hear. Show us what you got. Or are you worried about wrinkling the suit? The crowd laughed. A few people clapped, expecting a show. The rich love blood sport, as long as it's kept on a neat little square of foam. I apologize, Mr. Cole, I said softly to Richard, but I'm on duty. It wouldn't be appropriate. Richard's smile tightened. He wasn't a man who was used to hearing the word no. I'm the one who decides what's appropriate, Jack. Take off the jacket. I'll throw a $5,000 bonus on your next check. Just grapple with him. Let him show off what I've been paying his instructors for. $5,000. That was 3 months of Sarah's specialized physical therapy. I looked at Tyler. He was pacing the mat like a caged dog playing to the crowd. He didn't want to work out. He wanted a victim. He wanted to humiliate the hired help to cement his own alpha status in front of his father and his peers. Sir, I said, keeping my voice low so only Richard could hear. With all due respect, you don't want me to do this. Richard frowned. The alcohol was making him irritable. Are you refusing a direct request, Jack? The threat was implicit. Refuse and pack your bags. The health insurance, the paycheck, gone. I slowly unbuttoned my suit jacket. A cheer went up from Tyler's friends. I folded the jacket neatly and set it on a nearby lounge chair. I reached up and loosened my tie, pulling it over my head, then unbuttoned the cuffs of my dress shirt and rolled the sleeves up past my elbows. The air was stifling. I stepped onto the edge of the mat in my dress shoes and slacks. Take the shoes off, driver, Tyler sneered. I don't want you scuffing my mats. I ignored him. I stepped to the center of the mat. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't get into a fighting stance. I just stood there, arms relaxed at my sides, my weight evenly distributed. Tyler bounced toward me, tapping his gloves together. All right, submission grappling. No striking to the face. You ready? Whenever you are, Tyler. He lunged. He was fast. I'll give him that. Youth and endless hours in a padded room had given him speed. He shot in for a double-leg takedown, aiming to wrap his arms around my thighs, lift me, and dump me onto the foam. It was a textbook move, perfect form. To me, he was moving underwater. When you spend a decade clearing rooms, where the delay of half a second means taking a bullet to the chest, your perception of time alters. As Tyler dropped his level and shot in, I didn't retreat. I simply stepped offline, a pivot of my left foot, shifting my center of mass laterally. Tyler's shoulder, which was supposed to hit my center mass, met empty air. He stumbled forward, off balance from his own momentum. As he passed me, I placed my right hand flat against the back of his neck and my left hand on his hip. I didn't push. I just guided his existing momentum downward. Tyler face-planted into the mat with a heavy thud. The crowd went dead silent. Tyler scrambled up, his face flushed brilliant red. He was humiliated. The textbook technique had failed against a guy standing in dress shoes. Lucky step, Tyler spat. The playful arrogance was gone. Real anger flared in his eyes. He came at me again. This time, he didn't go for a takedown. He threw a heavy looping right hook. It was a wild punch, breaking his own rules about striking. I didn't step back. I stepped in, inside the arc of his punch. Before his fist was even halfway to my face, my left hand shot up, the blade of my forearm deflecting his bicep, completely neutralizing the strike. Simultaneously, I slid my right foot behind his lid leg. I didn't throw a punch. I didn't need to. I just stepped through him. The leverage was absolute. Tyler went airborne for a fraction of a second before slamming onto his back, hard enough to knock the wind out of his lungs in a sharp, wheezing gasp. He lay there for 2 seconds staring up at the sky, trying to remember how to breathe. I stood over him, still not having broken a sweat. My breathing hadn't changed. My heart rate was resting at a cool 60 beats per minute. "Are we done, Tyler?" I asked quietly. But Tyler wasn't done. The humiliation was too much. The spoiled child had been exposed, and he reacted the only way he knew how, with blind rage. He rolled to his feet, ignoring the lack of oxygen, his face twisted into a mask of fury. He rushed me, abandoning all his training. He just wanted to hurt me. He wanted to break something. He reached out, grabbing the collar of my dress shirt with both hands, trying to muscle me into a clinch. The moment his hands clamped onto my clothing, the switch in my head flipped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was 12 years of deeply ingrained muscle memory taking over. The civilian protocol dropped away, and the operator took the wheel. My hands moved in a blur. I didn't grab his wrists. I snaked my right arm over his, trapping his left arm against his own chest. My left hand gripped the back of his tricep, securing the lock. With a violent, twisting drop of my hips, I snapped his posture downward, dragging him forward while rotating. It's called a standing arm triangle setup, but I didn't stop there. As he fell forward, I stepped my right leg behind his knees and dropped my weight entirely. We hit the mat, but I wasn't underneath him. I was beside him, my knee driving into his floating ribs with precise, measured pressure, just enough to pin him, not enough to crack the bone. My left arm was wrapped around his throat, not a clean rear naked choke, a blood choke. My forearm pressed directly into his carotid artery. It took less than a second from the time he grabbed my shirt to the time he was pinned to the floor, completely immobilized, my arm clamped around his neck. The silence on the lawn was absolute. No one was laughing now. Tyler thrashed wildly, panic setting in. He tried to pull my arm away, but his hands couldn't find purchase. The panic escalated as the blood flow to his brain was restricted. I leaned down, my lips inches from his ear. My voice was a gravelly whisper, stripped of all politeness, all subservience. It was the voice I used in the dark. "Listen to me very carefully," I whispered. "You play a game. You wear a belt. You pay a coach. You tap a mat. That is a game. Where I come from, there are no mats. There are no taps. You don't get to submit. You just don't get to go home." He was gurgling slightly, his eyes wide and terrified, staring up at me. "I am going to let go," I said. "And you are going to stay exactly where you are until I walk away. Do you understand me?" Tyler gave a frantic, desperate nod. I released the pressure instantly, standing up in one smooth motion. I didn't look at him as he rolled onto his side, coughing violently and gasping for air. I turned to look at the crowd, the executives, the beautiful people, all staring at me with wide, shocked eyes. They were looking at a ghost. The invisible driver had just dismantled their golden boy with terrifying clinical efficiency. I met Richard Cole's eyes. The billionaire looked pale, the martini glass trembling slightly in his grip. He finally understood what he had. Sitting in the driver's seat of his car every day. I walked over to the lounge chair, picked up my jacket, and slung it over my shoulder. "I'll expect that bonus in my next check, Mr. Cole," I said loudly enough for the front row to hear. Then I turned and walked toward the driveway, leaving the silence behind me. Monday morning arrived with the smell of wet asphalt and impending heat. I stood by the Maybach in the circular driveway, the engine purring its quiet, expensive idle. For the first time since I took the job, Richard Cole didn't keep me waiting. He walked out the front doors precisely at 7:30. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't barking orders at an assistant trailing behind him. He walked alone, his eyes locked on me. He stopped 3 feet away, inspecting me as if I were a piece of machinery he had just purchased without reading the manual. I opened the rear door. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." He didn't say a word. He slid into the leather seat. I closed the door, walked around the rear of the vehicle, and got behind the wheel. We pulled out of the gates in absolute silence. The silence lasted all the way down the Merritt Parkway. Usually the back seat was a war room. Richard would be screaming at junior partners, threatening litigation, tearing apart term sheets. Today, the privacy glass remained lowered. He just stared out the window, watching the trees blur past.